Hello, welcome to the next ACE research review. And today we're looking at the Zone 2 controversy. Just for some context, Zone 2, what are we talking about? We're talking about an exercise intensity. So if you're about to embark on a endurance training program, for example, you want to get fit and start doing, I don't know, fun runs, you're going to compete in cycling events. One of the things you'll do inevitably is go, okay, well, I need a training program. What does that look like for an endurance sport or endurance activity? And typically what you'll come across is some endurance training zones, and they're based on either the work rate or your heart rate. Zone 2 is one of the particular intensity zones or bandwidths that you'll structure your exercise sessions around. Now, it's not the only one, and there's lots of different models on Zone 2, as we'll see. This has become very popular. Excuse me. A lot of talk in social media about this magical Zone 2, what it can do, what it can't do. If you haven't heard about it before, if you do some Googling on it, you'll very quickly find lots of information. Today, we're going to look at a particular paper that has criticized some of the messaging around Zone 2. So let's do that. Now, it's a pretty good title, I have to admit. Much Ado About Zone 2. Very catchy title. This was a narrative review which assesses the efficacy of Zone 2 training for key points, improving mitochondrial capacity. So mitochondria is that component in our muscle cells. It's where we generate energy. It's the cell's powerhouse. That's how we describe it. And cardiorespiratory fitness in general population. Why? Because there's been so much media attention about this zone. Much of it, though, much of it is targeting a general population group. So that's you and me. I'm not an elite athlete. Maybe you're not. Sorry if you are. We do some research around what sort of training program should I follow if I want to start to get a bit more endurance or I want to go in on an endurance event. So it was a narrative review rather than a systematic review. So just to point out that this isn't the highest form of evidence on our hierarchy of scientific evidence. A narrative review is not as robust as a systematic review with a meta-analysis. So it's definitely robust, but not at the highest level. So just keep that in mind. Narrative review only. It examined whether Zone 2 truly is an optimal intensity for achieving all these claims. These are the claims that if you do Zone 2 training, you'll maximize your mitochondrial function. You will improve your ability to use fat as a fuel. That's what fat oxidation means. And it'll improve your aerobic fitness. And it might be the optimal way to improve aerobic fitness. Now, the authors in this paper, one of which is the great Martin Gibala, who is a real well-known expert in the area of high-intensity interval training programs, written some really good books. And if you want to know about high-intensity interval training, any of his work is worth reading. So he's one of the authors. And they looked at a series of studies that sort of review does that involved exercise performed at various intensities. Now, I won't go into the weeds right now about how we actually define Zone 2 because there's huge arguments even about what is Zone 2 and how you actually define it and even measure it. That's a conversation on its own right. But just to know, that's what they did in this paper. So they searched for studies that have used these various different definitions of Zone 2, things like the lactate threshold, ventilation threshold, fat max, or typically in intensities where in studies they've worked at 45% of their measured VO2 max. Now, let's just get to the main findings of what they report in this Much Ado About Zone 2. So firstly, the authors challenged the popular claim that Zone 2 is the optimal intensity for improving mitochondrial health and cardio fitness. Now, they argue, based on the studies that they review, that the current evidence doesn't support that conclusion. And remember, this is targeting you and me, general population, not elite athletes, because that's entirely different. And there's a different body of research around what is the optimal training program for elite athletes. But for you and me, trying to get fit and healthy, perhaps we are interested in something like mitochondrial health. Why? Because mitochondrial health is closely linked to longevity. If you follow any of the writings on longevity and the longevity claims, mitochondrial function is considered a biomarker of healthy aging. So there's definitely strong links to that. And anyone who's interested in longevity, might know then that Zone 2 training is also proposed to be a great training intensity for longevity. From the results of this paper, though, the authors are saying that the conclusions don't warrant that. Okay, so their argument's just not enough evidence to support that conclusion, despite what you might read on social media. They also then go on to say that Zone 2 does improve health and fitness. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's accept that Zone 2 training is essentially moderate intensity physical activity or aerobic exercise, sorry. But it's moderate intensity. That's what it is. Let's call it for what it is, whether or not we use Zone 2 or not. So we know there is a plethora of research and data that tells us that moderate intensity physical activity is very, very good for our health. So the authors, to their credit, aren't disputing that. If you do Zone 2 training, you're going to get a health benefit. They're just simply saying it isn't the optimal zone to maximize every health benefit. Then they go on to say that a lot of what we know about Zone 2 has come from the observations of elite endurance athletes. That would make sense, right? So we know that elite endurance athletes are going to do lots and lots of endurance training. They're going to spend lots of time at a zone, an intensity that isn't too high but isn't too low, because if it's too high, they just simply can't recover in time. If it's too low, obviously, then what's the point? Okay, that goes without saying. And then the last point is that much of the evidence base is limited by relatively short. So there is some constraints with the studies in this space. Okay, so they're not perfect, which means they're open to criticism themselves, which means it's actually really, really hard to prove that Zone 2 training might achieve many of the claims. At this stage, there just simply isn't strong enough evidence for you or I to say, right, I'm only going to do Zone 2, or I'm going to make sure that everything I do is based around Zone 2. Definitely not a good thing to do. I would agree with the authors in this paper on these findings. We shouldn't do that. That said, there is another side to this story that we should consider. And we should always consider both sides of any debate. And there is a debate. On one side of the fence is this guy in the photo here. His name is Indigo San Milan. He is the understudy of the legendary exercise physiologist George Brooks, who I remember as an undergraduate student reading all of his textbooks. We were assigned textbooks on exercise physiology written by George Brooks, a real guru and legend in the exercise physiology space. So Milan, guy in this photo, is his understudy. And he has coached many, many of the world's best athletes, many of them. Now, Milan puts Zone 2 training in this context. Now, firstly, he talks about the benefits for individuals who aren't active, so sedentary people, and those who have metabolic challenges. So people who have metabolic syndrome, diabetes, these people tend to have serious disturbances in how their muscle cells function, to keep it simple. Now, these people, the machinery inside out their cells is broken, the muscle cells. It's the mitochondria, what we mean to by the machinery. So it's not working properly. And one of the problems is that it doesn't clear things like lactate properly, when lactate actually should be a fuel, not a waste product. It's actually an important fuel that if our cells are functioning well, they can use lactate correctly. So that's the problem. Being inactive breaks down how your muscle cells function, and the molecular machinery, which is partly the mitochondria, that is responsible for using lactate in the cells. Now, because it's compromised, it's not doing its job with how it uses fuel, waste builds up. Waste builds up, the cell doesn't function well, and this person ends up being very fatigable at very low workloads. Okay, so, and it's pretty obvious. If you know anyone who's sedentary, plus they've got health problems, they typically get out of breath very easily, like walking up the steps. Okay. So, but this early fatigue, why do they run out of breath? Why is it they struggle to do things that you and I might be able to do without running out of breath? What's causing this early fatigue? Well, it isn't just a fact that they've got poor cardio. It's part of it, of course. If they're sedentary, we're not going to expect them to be fit. But part of the underlying problem is that the machinery in their muscle cells is broken. And if it's not processing fuel properly, it contributes to this fatigue problem. Okay, so it isn't just poor cardio, we might assume. Okay, it isn't just that they've got low muscle mass. There's a real problem with how the machinery is working. It's broken. So zone 2 is a repair shop, as he says, that basically spending more time progressively at this intensity can apply a fix to that broken machinery because it's moderate. It's not too hard. It's not too easy. It's steady. He says gentle but moderate load that forces the body to repair this machinery and gets the muscle cell working properly. And we can spend more time at this intensity because we don't get as tired, we don't need as much recovery. So that's a counter argument. It actually could be very therapeutic to these people. And that's why, going back to moderate intensity, why all the leading World Health Organizations say the same thing. Do 150 minutes a week at a minimum. 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity. So this message really just aligns with well-established guidelines. So that's what I mean by no need to then say, well, zone 2 is absolutely worthless based on the findings in that paper of Much Ado About Zone 2. So where is it? So this is part of the story where we find zone 2. So as I said at the beginning, here is some examples of some endurance training zones that are based on either your heart rate or on the power output. If you're using a device that measures your power output, like a cycling ergometer that tells you how many watts you're producing as you cycle. There's all these different ways that we can quantify where zone 2 is and how you find it. But I will say this, heart rate is the least reliable method. Much more reliable to use lactate testing above all else, which isn't on this graph or this one either that I'm showing you. But just to make it clear to you, because if you haven't heard about zone 2, it's that moderate intensity work rate that occurs within the aerobic threshold or just under it. So what is the take home? So if you're a health-focused individual and you want to start improving your aerobic fitness, you want to do fun runs, you want to start doing cycling, running, swimming, something where there's potentially a competitive element, or you just want to get fitter in general, moderate intensity exercise, aka zone 2, provides that important foundation. Now, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say we only do that. Of course, higher intensity interval training is important, and that's also part of the story. And that provides an important high intensity stimulus, particularly for our heart. So if you combine the two, if you do a bit of everything, you're going to get the best result. That's really the important message. So the greatest adaptations occur when we use a range of different intensities. We don't just do one or the other. And of course, importantly, then we undulate our training program. So we're not just constantly doing the same thing over time. We've got to have light and shade. We've got to have sessions during the week that are harder, and then we have recovery sessions. And then over time, we've got to build, build, build. So essentially what we call periodization. So really, the evidence suggests that if we really want to boil down the argument, what is the optimal intensity if it's mitochondria stimulus, mitochondrial function, mitochondrial health? Right now, the weight of evidence leans towards higher intensity interval training. But zone 2 still provides a benefit. It's not like zone 2 or moderate intensity doesn't benefit the mitochondria at all. That's not the case. So it remains valuable because you can accumulate more amount of training and it supports recovery as well. So do the both together. Go away now and see what you can learn about zone 2. And then in my next presentation, I'm actually going to go into the specific details about the most accurate ways to actually find your zone 2 and a little bit more about what else zone can do in regards to the age-old myth that lactic acid is a waste product and it is responsible for causing our muscles to burn, be sore, and get tired. It's actually getting up to 100 years that we've been misunderstanding what lactate and lactic acid are. So we'll cover that in my next presentation. And that's the full reference for today's study.